The jarring ring of my phone shattered the morning quiet at exactly 6:14 a.m. on a crisp Tuesday. I was already awake, sitting on the wooden porch of my solitary cabin just outside Durango, Colorado. A steaming mug of bitter coffee rested in my hands as I watched the pale sun slowly climb over the jagged peaks of the mountains. I had become a chronic early riser ever since the divorce shattered my world. Sleep simply did not come easily to me anymore, so I had eventually stopped fighting the insomnia. My phone buzzed against the table. It was an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some strange instinct made me answer. "Mr. Sterling, this is Dr. Blackwood at Children's Hospital Colorado in Aurora. I'm calling regarding your son, Connor." I sat up so fast my coffee spilled onto the porch. My son. That was a beautiful, painful phrase I had not heard directed at me in 3 agonizing years. "What happened? Is he all right?" My voice shook. "Connor has recently been diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia," the doctor explained softly. "He desperately needs a bone marrow transplant to survive. His mother provided us with your contact information as a potential biological donor." My ex-wife, Natalie, had actually given them my number. This was the same Natalie who had spent the last 3 years poisoning my boys' minds, telling them that I had selfishly abandoned them. The same woman who had blocked my phone number, returned every single birthday and Christmas letter I sent completely unopened, and cruelly texted me after the divorce was finalized to say the twins were too ashamed to even call me their father. But now, when her back was against the wall, Natalie suddenly needed my help. "I'll be there in exactly 6 hours," I promised without a second thought. My name is Arthur Sterling. I am 41 years old. These days, I work as a rugged wilderness guide in southwestern Colorado, leading exhausting hiking and camping expeditions for tourists who want to experience the untamed mountains. Before this solitary existence, I was a respected high school history teacher in Denver. I made a decent living, had a perfectly normal life, and shared a home with my wife and our beautiful twin sons. That comfortable life violently ended 3 years ago, when Natalie coldly decided that my best simply was not enough for her anymore. The frantic drive from Durango to Aurora took me 5.5 nerve-wracking hours. I pushed my old Jeep far past the speed limit the entire journey, the engine rattling loudly over steep mountain passes and speeding down into the sprawling flatlands east of the Rockies. I did not stop for a meal, a coffee, or gas. I only paused once to use the restroom at a desolate rest stop near Poncha Springs. My beloved boys, Connor and Mason. They were 11 years old now. The very last time I had seen them in the flesh, they were only 8. They had stood in the sunlit driveway of the house I used to own, their small faces confused as they watched me load heavy cardboard boxes into the back of a rental truck. "Daddy, why are you leaving us?" little Mason had asked, his voice trembling. "I'm never leaving you, buddy," I had choked out, fighting back tears. "I'm just moving to a different house for a little while. I'll see you every single weekend, I promise." But I never saw them again. Natalie viciously made sure of that. The children's hospital was incredibly enormous. It was a sprawling, sterile complex of towering buildings, connected by glass walkways and underground tunnels that were tragically filled with sick, fragile children and deeply terrified parents. My heart pounded against my ribs as I found the oncology ward on the 4th floor and gave my name to the sympathetic nurse at the reception desk. "Mr. Sterling, Dr. Blackwood is eagerly expecting you, but first, there is someone in the lobby who wishes to speak with you." She gestured gently toward the brightly lit waiting area. Natalie was sitting slumped in a cheap plastic chair, desperately clutching a flimsy paper cup of black coffee, as if it were the only anchor keeping her tethered to the earth. She looked remarkably older than I remembered, her face drawn and significantly thinner. The arrogant confidence and cruel sharp edges that had defined her entire persona during our bitter divorce were completely gone. They had been entirely replaced by something hollow, exhausted, and incredibly desperate. She saw me approach and slowly stood up. "Arthur." "Natalie." We stared at each other silently across a massive, unbridgeable gulf of 3 years of forced silence. "Thank you so much for coming," she finally whispered, her voice cracking. "I know I really don't deserve." "Where is Connor?" I interrupted sharply, having no patience for her apologies. She physically flinched at the icy tone of my voice. "Room 412. He's sleeping right now. The heavy chemotherapy is exceptionally hard on his little body. Mason is currently staying with my mother. He desperately wanted to come, but I thought," she trailed off nervously, "I thought it would be much easier if he wasn't here during the testing." Easier for who? I wanted to scream at her, but I did not have the emotional energy for that familiar fight. Not today. "Where exactly do I go for the bone marrow test?" "The main lab is down on the second floor. Dr. Blackwood said she would meet you right outside." Natalie tentatively reached out a trembling hand, looking as though she wanted to comfortingly touch my arm but quickly stopped herself. "Arthur, I know things ended terribly between us, but Connor really needs this. He needs you. He has needed me every single day for the past 3 years, Natalie. You just cruelly refused to let him have me." I turned on my heel and walked away before she could even formulate a response. The intensive bone marrow compatibility testing process took roughly an hour. The diligent medical staff drew several vials of my blood, swabbed the inside of my cheek with precision, and ran me through an exhaustively long medical history questionnaire. Dr. Blackwood was a petite, brilliant woman with deeply kind eyes and a remarkably efficient bedside manner. She explained the complex medical process with absolute clarity, answered all my frantic questions with immense patience, and treated me like a grieving human being rather than just a convenient biological donor. "We should have the highly accurate preliminary results within a few hours," she informed me gently. "If you are perfectly compatible, we will immediately sit down to discuss the next crucial steps. The donation procedure itself is relatively straightforward, although it does require a short, uncomfortable hospital stay for recovery." "Whatever he needs, Doc. I honestly do not care about the painful procedure. Just please tell me if I can finally help my son." She nodded respectfully and left me alone in the silent waiting room. I sat frozen in that uncomfortable chair for 3 agonizing hours. I did not eat a bite of food. I did not read the magazines scattered around. I just sat perfectly still and thought deeply about Connor, about Mason, about the thousands of precious milestones and mundane moments I had painfully missed. When Dr. Blackwood finally returned, the expression on her face had drastically changed. Something was horribly wrong. "Mr. Sterling, could you please come with me?" She led me down a sterile, brightly lit corridor into a remarkably small, private conference room. Sitting inside were two other serious-looking professionals, a tall man in a tailored suit and a stern woman in a crisp white lab coat. Both of them were intensely staring at a thick manila folder resting on the table. "Mr. Sterling, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Tarek Vance, our esteemed head of hematology, and Dr. Alina Rostova, our chief of genetics." Genetics? My mind raced. Why in the world would they ever need a geneticist for a simple bone marrow swab? "Please have a seat," Dr. Vance offered. I sat down heavily. My heart was pounding so forcefully I could hear the rushing of blood in my own ears. "Mr. Sterling," Dr. Blackwood began slowly, measuring her words, "we carefully ran your extensive compatibility test 3 separate times. We thoroughly checked for any possible lab errors, cross-contamination, or literally anything that might logically explain what our machines found." "What exactly do you mean? Am I just not a medical match?" The 3 doctors exchanged deeply uncomfortable, pitying glances. "Mr. Sterling," Dr. Vance said softly, "the rigorous test results absolutely confirm that you are not biologically related to Connor in any way." The words floated in the air, completely devoid of sense. That is utterly impossible. He is my flesh and blood. He and Mason are twins. I was standing right there in the bloody delivery room when they were born. We deeply understand how incredibly shocking and difficult this is to hear, but the hard science of genetics does not lie. Dr. Rostova leaned forward, her voice filled with sympathy. We purposefully ran a full, comprehensive DNA panel. There is absolutely zero paternal DNA match between you and Connor. Furthermore, based on the specific genetic markers we discovered, we confidently believe there would be absolutely no match with Mason, either. What the hell are you saying to me? That neither of my boys is actually mine? That is exactly what we are saying, Mr. Sterling. Neither twin shares a single drop of your DNA. It is scientifically impossible for you to be their biological father. The small room violently started spinning. I had to tightly grip the cold edge of the conference table just to keep from falling out of my chair. Then who is? We unfortunately do not know. That specific answer would require independently testing other potential fathers. Dr. Blackwood's voice was gentle, like a mother soothing a wounded child. Mr. Sterling. Gee, I am so incredibly sorry. I truly cannot imagine the depth of the pain this revelation must cause. I could not speak. I could not form a single rational thought. I could not do absolutely anything except blankly stare at that horrific manila folder resting on the table. The terrifying folder that contained undeniable scientific proof that my entire adult life had been nothing but a cruel, elaborate lie. 11 beautiful years. 11 long years of unconditionally loving those two amazing boys, of proudly coaching their chaotic youth soccer teams, of patiently helping them struggle through complex math homework, of doing funny voices while reading them countless bedtime stories. 11 years of wholeheartedly believing I was their dad. And suddenly, none of it was fundamentally real. There is something else, Dr. Rostova stated very carefully. Something extremely rare that makes this entire medical situation much more complicated. More complicated? How could this possibly get any worse? The detailed genetic analysis revealed a stunning anomaly. Connor and Mason are indeed twins, yes, but they are absolutely not identical twins, as you were presumably led to believe. They are completely fraternal. Okay, I breathed out slowly. So fraternal twins, they can actually have different fathers. It is exceptionally rare, but yes, it physically happens. In medical terms, it is called heteropaternal superfecundation. I aggressively stared at her. Different fathers. Are you sitting there telling me my twin sons have two completely different fathers? We are officially saying that Connor and Mason were fathered by two distinctly different biological men, neither of whom is you. Dr. Rostova paused, letting the devastating gravity of the situation settle. Mr. Sterling, the medical facts indicate your ex-wife was intimately involved with at least two different men during her precise window of conception. Two other men, not just one terrible mistake. Two. Natalie had not just casually cheated on me in a moment of weakness. She had slept around with multiple people, gotten simultaneously pregnant by two entirely different strangers, and then wickedly let me believe for over a decade that I was the proud father of both her children. I aggressively stood up, but my knees instantly buckled, and I collapsed heavily back into the chair. My legs simply refused to hold my weight. I just need a minute alone. Take all the time you need, Dr. Blackwood said kindly. We will be waiting right outside whenever you are fully ready. They quietly filed out, leaving me entirely alone in that suffocating conference room. I sat there for what felt like an absolute eternity, staring blankly at the wall, desperately trying to mentally process how every single thing I cherished about my life had just been ruthlessly erased. I first met Natalie Colebrook at a close mutual friend's lavish wedding way back in 2009. She was a radiant bridesmaid. I was a nervous groomsman. We were playfully paired together for the grand reception entrance, and by the exact time the extravagant dinner was finally over, I knew with absolute certainty that I wanted to see her again. She was 26, actively working as a brilliant marketing coordinator for a booming tech startup. She was sharp, fiercely ambitious, and possessed a musical laugh that magically made you feel like you were the wittiest, most important person alive. We happily dated for 2 wonderful years, romantically got engaged during a rainy trip to San Francisco, and joyfully married in the crisp fall of 2011. Looking back now, with the painful clarity of hindsight, I can plainly see the massive, glaring warning signs. The toxic way she constantly craved validation and attention from strangers. The highly inappropriate way she flirted with other men at parties and aggressively defended it as harmless fun. The suspicious way she would completely disappear for long hours on weekends and come back with bizarre, convoluted explanations that never quite added up. But I was incredibly, stupidly in love, and profound love makes a man completely blind. The twins were miraculously born in the freezing March of 2013. Natalie had confidently assured me they were identical. 2 perfect little boys, the exact same egg miraculously split in 2 flawless genetic copies of each other. I wholly believed her because, frankly, why wouldn't I? I was just a history teacher, not a medical doctor. I genuinely did not know the microscopic scientific differences between identical and fraternal twins in the womb. I proudly held those tiny, screaming babies in the freezing delivery room and openly wept with profound joy. Connor arrived first, loudly protesting the cold air, and then little Mason followed exactly 4 minutes later. They were tiny, incredibly wrinkled, and absolutely perfect, and I loved them instantly with a fierce, unbreakable devotion. For the next 8 glorious years I was a dedicated father. I certainly was not a perfect one. I often worked far too much, occasionally missed a minor school event, and foolishly lost my temper when exhausted much more than I probably should have. But I showed up. Every single day I showed up. I happily changed mountains of foul-smelling diapers, gently wiped endless runny noses, sat freezing through countless hours of terrible youth soccer games, read a million silly stories, bravely checked closets for imaginary monsters, and tightly held them both whenever they woke up crying and terrified. I deeply thought we were incredibly happy. I thought our beautiful little family was an unbreakable fortress. Then, in 2020, Natalie coldly sat me down and announced she wanted a divorce. I'm just not happy anymore, Arthur. I honestly haven't been truly happy for several years. What do you even mean? I thought things were good between us. Good simply isn't enough for me. I want so much more than just good. I want intense excitement, burning passion. I want something that feels real. Real? We literally have 2 wonderful children together. We built an entire life. What on earth is more real than that? She had just looked at me with something deeply resembling pathetic pity. You really don't understand me. You never actually understood me. She maliciously had a ruthless lawyer already fully retained. She had absolutely everything meticulously planned out. The sprawling house, the joint bank accounts, full legal custody of our boys. She demanded total, absolute control over my life, and she possessed the endless financial resources to ruthlessly get it. Her wealthy parents were incredibly rich. Her arrogant father proudly owned a massive, highly profitable chain of car dealerships stretching entirely across the Front Range. They happily bankrolled her vicious, high-priced legal team, and on a public school teacher's modest salary, I simply could not compete. I desperately tried to fight for my beloved boys. I passionately tried to legally argue that I was an excellent, loving father, that I inherently deserved at least 50-50 joint custody. But Natalie's expensive lawyers aggressively painted a completely fabricated, horrific picture of me to the judge. They falsely claimed I was an absent father, totally emotionally unavailable, dangerously neglectful, and vastly more interested in my teaching career than my own flesh and blood. Absolutely none of it was remotely true, But the honest truth does not always naturally win in the dark halls of family court. The stern judge ultimately awarded Natalie full, uncontested custody. I was humiliatingly granted visitation only every other weekend. It was closely supervised at first, with a promise of becoming unsupervised if things went well. But things never even got the slight chance to go well. Exactly 2 painful weeks after the brutal divorce was legally finalized, Natalie abruptly moved the boys far away to her wealthy parents' massive estate in Castle Rock. She spitefully changed their schools, permanently changed their phone numbers, and systematically changed absolutely everything. When I excitedly showed up for my very first scheduled visitation, bearing gifts, the massive house was totally empty. I frantically called her slick lawyer. He coldly informed me that Natalie had emergency filed for a sudden legal modification strictly based on my supposedly erratic and threatening behavior. I had absolutely not behaved erratically. I had merely, desperately tried to see the sons I loved. The bloated legal courts moved agonizingly slowly. By the exact time I finally secured a desperate hearing, Natalie had masterfully built an impenetrable brick wall of false paperwork and vile accusations. She lied and claimed under oath that I had violently threatened her life. She lied and claimed the boys were physically terrified of me. She claimed I was mentally unstable and deeply dangerous to children. I devastatingly lost my visitation rights entirely. The very last text message I ever received from Natalie was exactly 6 soul-crushing words. "They're ashamed you're their father." I mournfully packed up and moved to Durango shortly after that dark day. I absolutely could not stay in Denver. I could not bear to walk past familiar, laughing playgrounds and cheerful elementary schools without obsessively thinking about the precious life I had so unjustly lost. I deliberately took an exhausting, physical job as a rugged wilderness guide solely because it forcefully kept me constantly outdoors, kept my tired body endlessly moving, and forcefully kept me from sitting alone in silence with my haunting thoughts. For 3 incredibly long years, I desperately tried to rebuild my shattered soul. I tried to painfully accept that my precious boys were permanently gone, and I tried to find some elusive semblance of inner peace in the mountains. And then poor Connor got terribly sick, and suddenly Taylor urgently needed me to play the hero again. I eventually found Natalie down in the brightly lit, depressing hospital cafeteria. She was sitting completely alone at a sticky corner table, listlessly pushing unappetizing hospital food around her plastic plate without actually taking a single bite. She slowly looked up when I aggressively approached, and something dark and terrifying in my expression must have immediately told her that I knew everything. "Arthur, did you finish the medical test?" "You lied to me." My voice was a deadly, quiet whisper. Her metal fork clattered loudly against the cheap plate. "What?" 11 entire years. You successfully lied to my face for 11 years. I slowly sat down directly across from her, my voice incredibly low but vibrating with raw fury. "The beautiful boys aren't mine, Natalie. Neither of them. The stunned doctors ran the incredibly precise genetic test 3 separate times." Natalie's pale face rapidly cycled through several dramatic expressions. Deep confusion, then stark terror, then finally something that looked horrifyingly like cold calculation. "That's simply not scientifically possible. There absolutely must be a massive medical mistake." "There is absolutely no mistake. And they also told me something else highly interesting. Connor and Mason aren't actually identical twins. They're fraternal, which scientifically means they could effortlessly have 2 different fathers." She said absolutely nothing. She just stared at her hands. "Different fathers, Natalie. As in 2 entirely different random men who definitely aren't me." Still agonizing, guilty silence. "Who exactly are they, Arthur?" "I really don't think this is the appropriate time," she whispered. "My precious son is literally dying upstairs." "Except he isn't actually my son, is he?" So I actually think this is the perfect exact time. I leaned threateningly forward across the sticky table. Who are the real biological fathers? Natalie shamefully squeezed her eyes tightly shut. It was a very long time ago, right before we were officially married. We were actively engaged. We were actively trying to get pregnant. I unfortunately know when it happened, Natalie. I'm asking who. She slowly opened her eyes. They were shining, wet with guilty tears. Does it honestly even matter anymore? It violently matters because one of those specific men might logically be a perfect medical match to save Connor. It fiercely matters because you have been wickedly lying to my face for over an entire decade. It fundamentally matters because I willingly sacrificed absolutely everything in my life for those beautiful boys, and they were never even rightfully mine. Natalie shakily wiped her wet eyes with a crumpled paper napkin. Garrett Hayes and Dane Yardley. Two completely random names I had absolutely never heard of in my entire life. Who the hell are they? Garrett was my highly paid personal fitness trainer back when I was obsessively doing CrossFit. Dane was. He briefly worked at my tech company. We casually had a stupid, meaningless fling during an out-of-state business trip. She frantically shook her head, trying to minimize her betrayal. It was incredibly stupid. I was very young and deeply confused, and you were constantly working long hours, and I just felt so horribly alone. So to cure your loneliness, you recklessly slept with two completely different men while we were happily engaged to be married. It really wasn't like that. It wasn't some massive, ongoing romantic affair. It was just what? Just two completely separate strangers who happened to biologically father the beloved children I proudly raised as my own flesh and blood. She possessed absolutely no excuse or answer for that undeniable truth. I stood up, towering over her. Where exactly are they right now, Garrett and Dane? I genuinely don't know. I honestly haven't spoken to either of them in many years. Then you better find them both today. One of them might actually be able to miraculously save Connor's fading life. Arthur, please wait. She desperately lunged forward and grabbed my arm. Does this shocking news mean? Are you completely refusing to help us? Are you refusing to finish getting tested? I already extensively was tested, Natalie. I am medically not a match entirely because I am not his biological father. I forcefully ripped my arm totally free from her grasping grip. You need to find the real fathers, Natalie. I will patiently stay around until you manage to do so, but after that is done, you and I are permanently finished. I blindly walked out of the noisy cafeteria. I miraculously made it entirely to the echoing, concrete hospital stairwell before my breaking point finally hit. I collapsed heavily onto the hard concrete steps, buried my face entirely in my shaking hands, and fiercely cried like I had absolutely not cried since the horrific finalization of the divorce. Everything I had unjustly lost, everything I had beautifully sacrificed, everything I had deeply mourned in agonizing solitude for 3 endless years. And absolutely none of it had even been based on reality. The wonderful boys I unconditionally loved with my entire soul were not actually mine. They had fundamentally never been mine. But I still fiercely loved them. That was, without a doubt, the most agonizingly painful part of this nightmare. Even deeply knowing the ugly truth, even fully knowing Natalie had wickedly fabricated my entire reality, I still unconditionally loved Connor and Mason. I still desperately wanted to proudly see them slowly grow up, joyfully graduate high school, happily get married, and excitedly have sweet kids of their own. Basic biology did absolutely not mysteriously, magically create that profound love within my heart. 11 long years of faithfully being their dedicated dad did, and lack of shared biology could absolutely not suddenly magically erase it either. Locating the whereabouts of Garrett Hayes and Dane Yardley took 3 incredibly stressful days. A desperate Natalie immediately hired a relentless, highly expensive private investigator, fully paid for by her incredibly wealthy parents, who had miraculously suddenly become exceptionally cooperative now that their beloved grandson was tragically dying. I miserably stayed at a cheap, run-down motel situated right near the towering hospital, faithfully visiting poor Connor whenever the strict doctors graciously allowed. He looked so heartbreakingly thin. The aggressive chemotherapy had completely taken his soft hair, drained his youthful energy, and obliterated his appetite. But his striking eyes remained exactly the same, those incredibly deep, expressive blue eyes that had always stared up at me with such absolute, unwavering trust when he was small. Dad. He still lovingly called me Dad, even after 3 agonizing years of his mother repeatedly brainwashing him into believing I was a selfish monster. He incredibly still called me Dad. "Hey there, buddy," I whispered softly, gently sitting beside his hospital bed. "How are you physically feeling today? Are you very tired?" "Everything in my body hurts, Dad." "I know it does, pal, but the incredibly smart doctors are actively working so very hard to make you completely better. They're definitely going to find someone amazing who can perfectly help you." "Is it going to be you?" Mom excitedly said you might definitely be a perfect match. I heavily hesitated. He incredibly did not know the terrible truth yet. Natalie had cowardly chosen not to tell her sick child. "We're actually still trying to medically figure all of that complicated stuff out, buddy. But no matter what incredibly crazy things happen, I am right here. I am absolutely not going anywhere." He managed a weak, exhausted smile. "I really missed you so much, Dad." "I missed you too, kiddo. So much more than you will ever possibly know." I tenderly held his fragile, thin hand until the heavy medication finally pulled him softly into a deep sleep. Mason came to bravely visit his brother on the second exhausting day. He was noticeably taller and significantly bigger than Connor now, glowing with health, possessing his mother's thick dark hair instead of the soft light brown that Connor and I visually shared, or rather, that I falsely thought we shared. Now I perfectly understood the distinct reason why they looked so physically different from each other. 2 completely different fathers. "Hi," he said extremely awkwardly, lingering hesitantly in the bright hospital doorway. "Hi, Mason, please, you can definitely come inside." He nervously shuffled cautiously into the sterile room, strictly avoiding any direct eye contact with me. "Mom recently said you kindly came to help try and save Connor." "That's exactly right." "She also said, she quietly told me you scientifically weren't a medical match." So Natalie had at least nervously told him that specific much, just unfortunately not the entirely devastating whole truth. "No, unfortunately, I magically wasn't, but the doctors are looking extremely hard for someone else who definitely might be." Mason quietly nodded his head. He desperately looked exactly like he really wanted to bravely say something profoundly important, but just completely did not mentally know how to start. "You can honestly ask me absolutely anything, Mason. Whatever big questions you might want to know." He finally nervously looked directly up at me. "Why exactly didn't you fiercely fight significantly harder to keep us? I really mean, immediately after the terrible divorce. Mom constantly told us you didn't want us in your life anymore, but I secretly never actually believed her." My damaged heart violently cracked wide open all over again. "I fiercely fought incredibly hard, buddy, as hard as I physically could. But your mom possessed highly expensive, ruthless lawyers I simply couldn't afford to pay, and the powerful judge unfortunately chose to entirely believe her terrible lies instead of me. I desperately tried endlessly to see you. I constantly called, wrote 100 loving letters, and even showed up uninvited at your new school once. Absolutely nothing legally worked. We never ever got a single letter from you. I deeply know you didn't. Your mom wickedly made sure of that terrible fact." Mason remained intensely quiet for a very long, thoughtful moment. "She definitely lied about a whole lot of really big things, didn't she?" Yeah, kid, she unfortunately did. Is she currently lying about something massive else? Something huge concerning the medical test? He was an incredibly smart kid. He always beautifully had been. You need to ask your mom about that, Mason. It honestly isn't my proper place to tell you those things. He intensely studied my face for a very long, profound moment. Then he slowly nodded with understanding and quietly walked entirely over to his sleeping brother's bedside. I silently left them both alone together. Garrett Hayes was successfully found entirely on the third frantic day. He was comfortably living a flashy life down in sunny Phoenix, confidently working as an arrogant senior fitness consultant for a massive national chain of expensive gyms. The skilled private investigator cleverly tracked him totally down utilizing old social media posts and buried corporate employment records. Natalie nervously called him on the phone. I was obviously not physically present for the tense conversation, but I instantly saw the terrified look on her pale face immediately afterward. "He's actually coming here," she whispered. "He confidently said he'll gladly get medically tested." Does he honestly know the truth about Connor? He certainly knows it now. What exactly did he say to you? Natalie shamefully looked totally away. He said he actually always deeply suspected it. I had excitedly told him I was very pregnant literally right before I officially married you. And then suddenly, surprisingly, I was having massive twins. He explicitly knew for 11 long years that there was a high statistical chance. And he simply never breathed a single word about it. He claimed he didn't want to completely ruin my nice, safe marriage. I actually laughed out loud, a harsh, incredibly bitter, hollow sound. My marriage was totally ruined the very exact moment you selfishly cheated on me, Natalie. He didn't actually save our marriage. He just conveniently helped you expertly hide your terrible lies much better. Garrett Hayes arrogantly arrived early the very next morning. He was extremely tall, excessively muscular, and heavily tattooed, possessing exactly the kind of intimidating, sculpted physique you would naturally expect from an obsessed personal trainer. He boldly swaggered right into the solemn hospital looking exactly like he proudly owned the entire massive building, oozing annoying confidence and cocky swagger. I intensely hated the man immediately upon seeing him, but he was exclusively here to miraculously save Connor's life. So, for the boy's sake, I firmly kept my mouth totally shut. His medical test painfully took about 2 hours. We all sat and anxiously waited in the exact same tiny conference room where my entire beautiful world had violently fallen apart just days prior. Dr. Blackwood finally rushed brightly into the room clutching the crucial results. "Mr. Hayes, you are miraculously a highly compatible partial match. It is not 100% perfect, but it is certainly close enough to safely proceed with the life-saving transplant." Garrett excitedly pumped his massive, tattooed fist in the air. "Hell yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about, Doc." Natalie instantly started violently sobbing in utter relief. "Oh, thank God, thank God." I just sat there and said absolutely nothing. Dr. Blackwood professionally continued. "We'll urgently need to fully schedule the complex surgical procedure as soon as medically possible. Connor's delicate condition is unfortunately rapidly deteriorating. Can you definitely commit to staying in town for at least the entire next week?" "Whatever it absolutely takes," Garrett proudly proclaimed, puffing out his chest. "He's legally my son, right? I'm absolutely going to be the hero who saves my own son." My son. He casually said those heavy words so effortlessly, so arrogantly, as if the 11 agonizingly beautiful years I had spent raising that boy genuinely meant absolutely nothing at all. I quietly stood up and silently walked directly out of the room. Absolutely no one even tried to kindly stop me. I was mechanically packing my cheap duffel bag back at the dreary motel a few hours later when someone surprisingly knocked loudly on the flimsy door. I opened it to find Mason standing nervously in the dim hallway, entirely alone. How in the world did you manage to get all the way over here? I see. Cretley took an Uber using Mom's credit card. Please don't tell Mom. I stepped widely aside to quickly let him inside the room. You're actually leaving, he said sadly, staring down at my half-packed bag. Yeah, kid. Garrett's a fantastic medical match for the surgery. They honestly don't really need me hanging around anymore. But I totally need you. Those 4 innocent words violently hit me directly in the chest like a physical punch. Mason, I finally deeply know everything. Okay. I expertly figured it all out. Mom finally told Connor completely about Garrett, about exactly how he's actually his real biological father, and I closely saw the terrified way she looked directly at me immediately afterward. It was exactly like she was intensely deciding whether she was brave enough to tell me the horrible truth, too. He sat down heavily on the creaky edge of the cheap motel bed. So I boldly asked her completely straight out, without flinching, and she tearfully admitted it entirely. Some random guy named Dane is supposedly my actual real father. I am so incredibly sorry, Mason. I am truly so sorry. Please don't be. You absolutely didn't do a single thing wrong. He powerfully looked straight up at my face, his eyes shining with unshed tears. You are still completely my real dad. I honestly don't care at all what some stupid scientific DNA test claims. You're the actual person who patiently taught me how to bravely ride a bike without training wheels. You're the dedicated person who lovingly stayed awake all night long, holding a bucket when I had the terrible stomach flu. You're the one who actually, genuinely showed up for us. I slowly sat right down directly next to him on the mattress. I desperately wanted so badly to be there for you every single day for the past 3 terrible years. I wanted to be there so much it physically hurt. I know you did. I brilliantly figured all of that out too. He roughly wiped his wet eyes with his sleeve. Mom maliciously lied to us about absolutely everything, didn't she? About you not deeply wanting us around anymore. About you supposedly being dangerous and scary. All of it, yeah, buddy, she truly did. But why? Why would she do that to us? I honestly don't know the answer. I have frantically been asking myself that exact same question every night for 3 miserable years. We sat together in deeply comforting silence for a very long time, just absorbing the heavy reality of the situation. So what exactly happens right now? Mason finally asked softly. Garrett miraculously saves Connor's beautiful life. Your mom is forced to finally deal with the massive, destructive consequences of her terrible lies. And you and your beloved brother get to ultimately figure out exactly who you truly want to exist in your lives moving forward. I absolutely want you safely in my life. Both of us firmly do. Connor actually asked entirely about you early this morning. He sleepily asked if you were definitely coming back to the room. I honestly don't exactly know if I legally can, buddy. Your mom completely holds full legal custody. The complicated courts. Forget the stupid courts. Mason's youthful voice was suddenly fiercely determined. I'm turning 14 in exactly 2 months. Connor is too. A judge will absolutely have to legally listen to what we want. We'll loudly tell them exactly what horrible things Mom did to us. We'll confidently tell them we strictly want to go live with you in Colorado. It's really not always that magically simple, son. It legally should be. He was absolutely right. It entirely should be. Let me heavily talk to an excellent lawyer very soon, I said finally, a tiny spark of hope igniting. Let me carefully see exactly what our legal options actually are. But Mason, I deeply need you to clearly understand something very important right now. What is it? I logically might not ever technically be your biological genetic father, but I will always, always fiercely be your real dad. No matter what crazy things happen with the frustrating courts, or the messy custody battles, or literally any of it, I am entirely your dad. Absolutely nothing in this entire universe changes that incredible fact. Mason leaned over and fiercely hugged me. He held on to me incredibly tight, exactly like he always used to do when he was very small and frightened of the dark. "I love you so much, Dad." "I love you too, buddy. Both of you amazing boys, forever and always." The miraculous bone marrow transplant flawlessly happened exactly a week later. Arrogant Garrett generously donated his rich bone marrow. Fragile Connor successfully received it. The complex surgical procedure went incredibly smoothly, and within just a few tense days, there were highly positive medical signs that the new transplant was beautifully taking hold. My wonderful son, the beautiful boy who was scientifically not biologically mine, was incredibly going to live to see another day. I faithfully visited his bedside every single day during his lengthy, painful recovery process. Natalie did absolutely not even try to stop me from entering. She genuinely could not really stop me anymore. The boys had passionately made it incredibly clear to everyone that they entirely wanted me constantly there, and after absolutely everything devastating that had finally come out into the open, she was simply not in a powerful position to ever argue again. Garrett proudly stuck around the city for a few days after his heroic donation, loudly basking in the overwhelming attention of happily being the conquering hero. But exactly when the bright spotlight naturally faded away, when precious Connor was completely no longer in any immediate mortal danger, he abruptly disappeared straight back to sunny Phoenix. Biological father. 11 entire years of total absence, one single fleeting week of arrogant presence, and then permanently gone again. That specific cowardly action loudly told me absolutely everything I ever needed to definitively know about the character of Garrett Hayes. Dane Yardley never even bothered to show up at the hospital at all. The private investigator successfully found his address, but he coldly refused to legally get involved. He heartlessly said he had his own beautiful family now and absolutely did not want to needlessly complicate things for his wife. Mason understandably took that terrible rejection incredibly hard initially, but he bounced back and recovered the amazing, resilient way fantastic kids surprisingly do. "I've luckily already got one amazing dad," he proudly told me a few happy weeks later. "I absolutely don't ever need another fake one." The grueling, highly expensive custody legal battle took exactly 8 long months to resolve. I wisely hired a brilliantly sharp lawyer this time around. A real, powerful one. Definitely not the thoroughly overworked, exhausted public defender I had regrettably used during the initial divorce. Her distinguished name was Camila Vargas, and she brilliantly specialized exclusively in highly complicated, messy custody cases. "You actually possess an incredibly strong legal case this time," she confidently told me after meticulously reviewing the mountain of evidence. The shocking biological father revelation, the heavily documented severe parental alienation, the massive fact that both teenage boys loudly express they want to permanently live with you. We can absolutely work wonders with all of this ammunition. What honestly are my realistic chances, Camilla? Significantly better than they were 3 terrible years ago, especially if Natalie simply doesn't stubbornly fight back too hard this time. Surprisingly, Natalie did not aggressively fight back at all. I genuinely think she was just profoundly exhausted, tired of constantly lying to everyone, tired of aggressively maintaining the fake, perfect facade, tired of always being the cruel, wicked villain in her own children's heartbreaking story. When the intense legal mediation finally started, she surprisingly agreed to grant me full 50-50 joint custody almost immediately. "I completely messed everything up," she tearfully told me quietly during a brief coffee break in the tense negotiations. "I entirely know I completely destroyed it all." "Yeah, Natalie, you unequivocally did." I was so incredibly terrified, Arthur. Immediately after the bitter divorce, I was insanely scared you would somehow manage to permanently take my boys completely away from me. So I selfishly chose to viciously take them far away from you first. That twisted logic absolutely doesn't magically make what you did right. I profoundly know nothing will ever make it truly right, she heavily sighed, looking defeated. But I desperately want the boys to safely have their father back in their lives, their real father, the devoted man who actually raised them. Can we please, at least, beautifully agree entirely on that? For the very first time in many agonizing years, we finally agreed entirely on something important. The final, legally binding custody arrangement victoriously gave me the wonderful boys every single alternating week, plus all the major exciting holidays and long, fun summer vacations up in the mountains. It is incredibly not a perfect situation, but it is vastly better than nothing. It is infinitely better than the 3 dark, depressing years of total, crushing silence that had tragically come before. Connor miraculously recovered fully from his terrible illness. The successful bone marrow transplant completely took hold, and his aggressive leukemia wonderfully went into complete, beautiful remission. And within just a single year, he was totally back to his energetic, silly old self, passionately playing competitive soccer, frustratedly struggling with complex math homework, loudly arguing endlessly with his twin brother over silly video games, just doing perfect. TLY, normal teenager stuff. He entirely knows the whole truth about Garrett now. He fully knows the tattooed man who generously donated his marrow is technically his biological genetic father. But he also deeply, profoundly knows exactly who lovingly raised him from a baby. Garrett physically saved my failing life with surgery, he emotionally told me once while we were fishing. But you, Dad, you always incredibly made my life totally worth saving. I openly, unashamedly cried like a baby when he beautiful said those perfect words to me. I simply could not physically help it. Mason never once tried to bravely reach out to Cold Dane. He entirely never wanted to. He confidently said he already had absolutely everything he ever needed right here in our cabin. The brilliant boys are 15 years old now. They are chaotic high school freshmen, awkwardly dealing with all the highly dramatic, confusing situations that naturally come with that specific awkward age. They excitedly still spend every single alternating week safely up at my cozy cabin in beautiful Durango, happily hiking massive trails, camping beneath bright stars, and eagerly learning exactly how to skillfully fish in the freezing mountain streams. It is certainly not the picture-perfect life I initially imagined. It is absolutely not the perfectly unbroken, traditional family I thought I was proudly building when I happily held them tight in that freezing delivery room all those incredible years ago. But it is intensely real, it is profoundly honest, and it is entirely mine. Natalie and I are definitely not close friends. We honestly probably never, ever will be. But we have successfully managed to somehow find a mature way to peacefully coexist, to smoothly communicate completely about the boys' needs without violently fighting, to totally put their happiness strictly ahead of our massive old wounds. She is reportedly getting married once again. I recently heard through the grapevine it is to some wealthy corporate accountant she conveniently met through her rich father's massive car business. I genuinely hope it beautifully works out for her this time around. Not entirely for her own selfish sake, but for the safety of the boys. They deeply deserve permanent stability. I am currently not actively dating anyone at all. I honestly have not really even tried to date since the messy divorce shattered my trust. Maybe wonderfully, someday I eventually will. But for right now, I have absolutely everything I desperately need. I have 2 amazing teenage sons who proudly call me Dad, a peaceful, gorgeous home high up in the mountains, and the profound, peaceful knowledge that microscopic biology is, without a doubt, the absolute least important part of actually being a real father. I proudly keep a beautiful photograph resting right on my wooden desk. It is from the boys' very first chaotic soccer game, way back when they were only 6 tiny years old. They are excitedly wearing matching bright blue jerseys, proudly holding up a cheap plastic trophy that absolutely everyone got just for merely participating, grinning wildly at the camera exactly like they just won the massive World Cup. I am standing happily in the blurred background, slightly out of focus. But if you look closely, you can easily tell I am smiling immensely, too. That specific photo was happily taken during the wonderful, truly good years. Long before the terrible divorce, long before the brutal, vicious custody legal battle, completely before I devastatingly learned that the precious boys I loved so much were scientifically not biologically mine. I used to stare sadly at it and feel incredibly depressed. All that beautiful happiness, all that sweet innocence, all of it seemingly built completely on a massive, unforgivable lie. But now, whenever I look closely at it, I just feel overwhelmingly grateful. Deeply grateful for those fantastic early years. Immensely grateful for the incredibly kind, smart young men those tiny babies eventually became. Grateful that, despite absolutely everything terrible Natalie wickedly did to us, despite all the horrific lies and cruel manipulation, the profound, unbreakable bond I faithfully built with Connor and Mason beautifully survived the storm. Shared blood absolutely does not magically make a family. Faithfully showing up every day definitely does. Just constantly being there through all the horrific, hard parts and the wonderfully easy parts, and absolutely everything messy in between. I proudly showed up for 11 beautiful years as their only actual, devoted father. And during the 3 dark, terrible years when I was cruelly, legally forbidden from ever seeing them at all, I completely never stopped emotionally showing up for them in my heart. And exactly when they were finally legally old enough to boldly choose for themselves, they happily chose me. That profound, beautiful choice is worth infinitely more than any scientific DNA test could ever. Tell me. So here is my final, incredibly important question for you today. What truly makes someone a real father? Is it merely microscopic biology? Is it a fancy legal document signed by a judge? Or is it profoundly something much, much deeper? Something incredible that simply cannot ever be medically measured in a sterile lab or aggressively argued in a cold courtroom. I miserably spent 3 agonizing years completely convinced I had permanently lost my amazing sons forever. But it wonderfully turns out I honestly never actually lost them at all. They were just patiently waiting for me to come back the whole entire time. Please tell me your amazing story below in the comments. What exactly does true family honestly mean to you? If this incredible journey resonated deeply with you, please hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who desperately needs to hear it today. And if you actively want more deeply emotional, inspiring stories exactly like this, subscribe to this channel. We post fantastic news stories every single day. True tales about real, struggling people, entirely impossible situations, and the amazing, unbreakable strength we all beautifully find precisely when absolutely everything falls apart. Make sure to turn on those bell notifications so you absolutely do not ever miss a single beautiful one. Thank you so very much for faithfully staying until the very end. It genuinely means absolutely everything to me. I will excitedly see you all in the very next one.